Simon's here too. Hi, Simon. Just to let you know, we're recording this. Okay. Oh man, I shouldn't try to compare myself to Daniel, who always does a much better job of this than me, but since he's not here, I'll do my best. Welcome, everyone. This is the GitOps Toolkit and Flux v2 public meeting. Thanks for coming along. Let me find my thing which has an agenda on it. There's not much on the agenda, but there's a couple of things. And lots of opportunity for questions and answers. So that's not it. Okay. Okay, so let's have a look. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Okay. By the way, if there is anything that you wish to talk about, then either speak up and I'll add it, or I think it's possible to just edit the document. You may have to request access or something, but that's okay. We'll figure that out. Okay, so the two things on the agenda are I'm going to do a quick run through of sort of prototypical image update automation, which is intended to be the GitOps Toolkit version of what Flux v1 does for updating images in your Git repo. And the other thing, agenda items are being added as I speak. Another thing is there is a requirement, or there's a problem which may need us to change the API groups, which is quite a technical thing that I'll get Hida to talk about in a second after that first thing. And another one, which is talk about the logo. Okay. My thing's not going to take very long, so we'll have plenty of time to cover the other things. All right, I'm just going to share my terminal screen. So figure out how to do that. Why is it asking me this? Okay, I'm not going to do that apparently. I'm going to go to GitHub and find my Git repo with this stuff in. And share that. Okay, yes, this will work fine. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so please excuse my struggling laptop. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to, by way of trying to explain the image update stuff, I'm going to look at its API, which is custom resources. So, and hopefully that will give you enough of an idea about how it works to either take away and think about, if you care to do that, or to have some questions you want to ask. So there's basically two parts, two controllers that operate. The first one is what I call the reflector controller. And that is the thing that goes away and scans image registries, which is something that Flux v1 just sort of does monolithically, just includes it. Here, you explicitly declare, as in this first bit, the image repositories that you want to be scanned. And then the second part of that is you provide a policy for what you consider to be the most recent image of an image repository. So you can see the second thing refers back to the refers back to the image repository resource. So these things are just a way of something that Flux v1 does according to your annotations. If anyone's familiar with that, you say, I want to send the images in this range from the repository. So this is accomplishing the same thing, but it's done with custom resources. And the outcome is that you get a status update on the image policy, which says this is the latest image. So that's that bit. That's reflecting the state of the image repository at like a Docker Hub or wherever into the cluster, so it can be acted on. The second part is this, which states the fact of an automation. So this refers to, first of all, refers to a Git repository, which is from the which is a Git repository from the source.fluxcd.io group, i.e. the Git repository type from the toolkit, GitOps Toolkit. And that gives it access to the Git repository. And then it says the updates you'll be doing are according to this policy, which is a thing we were just looking at. So this is in effect saying, clone the repository, go through and update any images that need to use the latest one per this policy, and then commit that back. So that's the other part of what Flux v1 does. But Flux v1 does that implicitly based on the annotations. Here it's all spelt out in this custom resource. And I think this is, I can show you a commit that it makes, which, there we go. And so it does exactly the same sort of thing as Flux v1 does. It just goes in, and anything that uses the image that you mentioned, it'll update with the new tag. So in this case, it wasn't using a tag, and it's just changed it so that it used the latest image, which it scanned for. All right, so I said that would be short. I'm going to keep sharing for now, just so I can, if I need to answer any questions, I can just flip to a thing. But if there are no questions, I'll stop sharing in a second. So are there questions about that so far?
Hey, I want to add some observations.
Cool, please do.
There's a huge difference between what Flux does and what we are building here. Flux, by default, will scan all the images in your cluster, and using pull secrets will connect to the Docker registry. What we are building here is an explicit request. Hey, connect to this Docker registry. Fetch images for this particular image. Get all the tags, and only then do the update. So you don't have to exclude things that you don't want to scan. You have to include them. So we took the opposite approach of scan by default. No, this time you have to present it. And another big difference is the fact that Flux uses image pull secrets to connect to the registry. you can now provide a separate a dedicated credential for this toolkit daemon to connect to the registry. So you can have a specialized, I don't know, IAM role or something like that. So it gives you access there.
Yep, those are all good points. And just to spell out one of the consequences, with Flux v1, you have to be running that in the same place as your workloads, because that's where it goes to look for the images to scan. But since with this thing you tell it exactly what to go and look at, you can have it running in a completely different cluster if you want to, or in a different namespace, and not give it access to the workloads and so on. It operates independently of the work, being able to see the workloads, being in the same place, which is potentially quite a big deal if you're running a lot of clusters, but you only want the automation to run in one place. And it means you can separate out, Stefan mentioned, you can separate out the permissions you give each thing. So there's no questions. I will just mention, and I'll link in the agenda, there's an open discussion which points at the design and so on in the toolkit.fluxcd.io. No, is that the right place, Stefan?
That's the website, yeah.
That's the website, sorry. The discussion in the GitHub repo for Toolkit. Beg your pardon. Anyway, I'll put a link in.
Hi, this is Chris. I just have a question about if there's been any discussion on this this feature versus always updating the core Git repo when you want to make a change to your images within your cluster, that your Git repo is the only source of truth and you don't do the CR scanning. Do you have discussions on that, or folks who use one versus the other?
I wasn't clear on the distinction. So the first one was.
So you only you have the Git repo and you have your container registry, right? And in the Git repo you have your YAML files or your Helm charts. And the way I understand this is that this is the, and tell me if I'm wrong here, this is the second, basically the second source of truth is your container registry. And if the images get updated there, then you'll apply them to the cluster, correct?
No. So
okay.
The way Flux v1 works, and the way this will work is not reconciling what's in the container registry with the cluster. It's reconciling what's in the container registry with Git. So in effect, what happens is, if you have said, please watch this image in the container registry, and there is a newer image, like a 1.0.1, in the example that I showed, then this controller makes a commit to your Git repo. So your Git repo is still the single source of truth, if you like, for what's running in the cluster. But this sort of extends that to say, by the way, there are other external facts which I have to reconcile. But the way I reconcile them is I make changes in the Git repo, and then that is what gets run in the cluster. Does that clear up?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I understood it too. You're right. But still, there's not an explicit commit to the Git repo that has the YAMLs or the Helm charts from the user. It's through your tooling. So the user only made a change into the container registry.
Well, there's a commit. So there's a commit I showed which updates the deployment to use the new image. Do you mean something different?
So like in a CI pipeline where you might be updating both the registry and the YAML, or you might just update the YAML, right? And they're going to two different places. One's going to the container registry, one is going to the Git repo, right? And what you're saying,
yeah, you might push the image to the container registry.
But at the same time, you would update the YAML file to use the later version.
Right, and then if that succeeds, then you might go and change the YAML and then commit that to Git. Yes.
Right. So that approach versus this approach where you only update the container registry and
Right,
then you let...
But you're not only updating the container registry, you're reacting to a change in the container registry and updating Git. This is what this is doing.
Let me put it differently. This feature is not when you control the container registry. This feature is more about, hey, I'm running a Redis server using the official Redis image from Docker Hub. I don't want to keep track of all the Redis CV patches. I want to let the machinery do it for me. And you can say, every time there is a Redis patch release, please update the image for me. So I, as an, I don't know, operations person, SRE person, I don't have to keep tabs on all these patch releases that are that I want to apply on the cluster. If I have full control over my CI pipeline and I can do the patch on my own from CI when I push my app image to Docker Hub. Before doing that, after doing that, I'm also going to change it in the YAML and commit the YAML from CI. Then it's perfectly fine. You don't need this feature. This feature is more about, I have all these images I have no control of, but I want to define some kind of automation when that particular image is being published.
I see. That makes sense. Perfect. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah,
so what you're saying right now is that the old way that Flux did it, it basically looked at all the images in your cluster and then would go out to those CRs and monitor them. And now you're saying you can very explicitly say, only look at this one, this one, this one. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, the sort of end result is the same as if you did it in CI. It's just where it happens might be different. But the kind of ideal, I think, would be that there's also a command line tool or an image that you could use in, say, GitHub Actions if you want to do it in CI and sort of get an equivalence with, these are my own images, and so I'm going to do all this in CI explicitly and update YAMLs. But for stuff that I only want to run, patch versions, then I will just automate that. So I don't have to write that bit into CI. But tastes certainly differ there.
Yeah, another thing to mention here, with Flux v1, Flux will always commit to the same branch that the cluster is reconciled with. So let's say you use the staging branch to reconcile your staging cluster. Every time Flux will detect a new image, it will do a commit to the staging branch. And a lot of people asked us, maybe I want to open a pull request. Maybe I don't want that change to go directly into the branch that's being reconciled. And what we are trying to do with the new API is say, use this particular branch when you do the replacement of the image, but when you write back to Git, instead of writing back to the same branch, you could specify another branch name or let the tooling create a new branch and push that branch to your repository. Then you can have, let's say, a GitHub action that reacts to new branches that begin with Flux CD automation, and that GitHub action will open a pull request saying, hey, Flux is trying to update your image to this tag. Do you approve it? And only after you approve it, only then that change will be applied on the cluster. So this is yet a security feature, an improvement that we are trying to do with the toolkit.
Oh, that's awesome. Great, thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good example of an extension point that's quite difficult to do with Flux v1 because it's quite monolithic. All the sort of code paths are already quite ossified, whereas there's obvious places where you can sort of insert different policies or different strategies for doing stuff. And that's a really good example of one, pushing back to a different branch. Another one is that I showed sort of the simplest style of update that is useful, which is just follow a particular policy. Like single one. Whenever this particular image changes, change that. But you can imagine there's different kinds of update you might want to do, like even if it's just a group of those things, update when any of these things change, or update according to some other calculation, update by looking at Git and seeing which is the most recent revision of this image. But yeah, and that's a lot easier to do with the new tooling than with Flux v1.
Yeah, where we need some help from anyone that has an opinion about that is how are we going to target particular containers from all these YAMLs? Right now, what Michael showed is when, let's say, you create a policy for Redis, all your Redis containers inside your particular branch will be changed to that tag.
Right.
But maybe you want to say, I want to apply this policy only for the Redis deployment in my staging namespace. So we have to enrich the API with something like maybe label selectors, but they also have to contain namespaces. So it's something that we are thinking of. How can we allow people to specify the target of a patch without having to modify or add annotations like we did with Flux v1 before. I'm not that keen on annotating files because maybe those files, let's say the deployment file, you are not in control of that deployment file. Maybe some other team is responsible for creating that Redis deployment. Mm-hmm. So you are only using it inside your namespace, but you cannot go to the deployment file and add something to it. So with the toolkit APIs, you should be able to target specific things, even if you are not the author of that deployment. So that's something we are thinking.
Yeah, it's a huge base for that kind of stuff. So we definitely need, with Flux v1, that it did it in such a particular way that there wasn't really any flexibility to change a lot. So you either used it or you didn't, and that was basically your choice. Whereas here, there's quite a large set of possibilities for how it can work, and we're right at the beginning of looking at those. And we know some things that don't work from Flux v1, but we're sort of far from those.
Yeah. So the list of requirements you have, where are you drawing them from?
So there is one sort of meta requirement, which is parity with Flux v1. So that is people who are using Flux v1 and want to use Flux v2, which is a particular configuration of GitOps Toolkit bits, should be able to do, should be able to have parity with what they had before. It might not work exactly the same way or have exactly the same interface, but they should be able to achieve the same things. So that's one kind of meta requirement. Other than that, it's a combination of asking people who use Flux a lot for this kind of thing, and trying to think through it ourselves.
Yeah, for me, a lot of requirements for the toolkit were born from I don't know, the feedback we constantly get on Slack or Slack.
Yes,
people say, hey, like I can give a really good example. Like people saying, I didn't add any kind of annotations to my deployment, and still Flux is scanning the registry, that container registry. Why is doing that? Well, because we assume you want all your registries to be scanned. So people kept asking that question. So we realized maybe we should make this opt-in instead of opt-out. That's how we took that decision. And
that's a great example. Another one is, which is just something to fix really, which is if you add in Flux v1, if you say that a workload is automated, then by default, it will just replace it with whatever it considers to be the latest image, rather than having a sort of safe default, like don't update anything until someone's explicitly said, here is what to use, like semver or something else. Yeah, it defaults to glob star, basically. So that's another reason for making these things explicit.
Okay, that's nice. So based on the loudest user feedback you've gotten over the last couple of years.
Maybe most persistent.
Most persistent, okay. All righty, it works.
All right.
Yeah, so there is a GitHub discussions specifically on the image update feature, and we look forward for any suggestions or feedback on that particular discussion. How we approach the toolkit design is we created a discussion for a particular topic. Usually it's an API spec that we are thinking of. We collect feedback, then after we come to a conclusion, we mark that answer as the right thing to do. Then we open an issue on that particular controller repository where we open pull requests and the implementation. So everything goes through a discussion that must be approved at some point, and only afterwards we implement what's in there, or someone else takes that. We have a couple of people that are helping us out lately, and I want to thank them all.
I didn't really get how the patching was done. So does it kind of work the same way that the original or the current Flux does it with like the patch files, or are you actually going in and replacing the source directly?
Yeah, good question. So what it does at present is it replaces it in, so if you have a deployment and it's in deployment.yaml, it goes and edits deployment.yaml and makes that commit. So it changes it in place. One thing that we thought about was having a sort of customized variation on this, where you say nominate a customization, and instead of going and patching the file in place, it adds it as a field, adapts the customization file instead to have the same effect. But you can only really do that for certain types of change, or it's gets quite complicated potentially.
Yeah, because that's exactly what I thought, because I had a similar idea of exposing more customization variables to the customization resource, where you could set like labels and things like that. It might get a bit too out of hand, but it feels like the image patching is kind of perfect for this.
Yeah, you have to, it would support the update that it does at present, where it just, everywhere it sees an image, it replaces it. So Customize will do a good job of that. But if you were selecting particular resources that you only, or containers that you only wanted those ones updated, or you wanted some updated with semver, some updated, there's also lots of things you can imagine, then that would quite quickly become very complicated, because you'd have to have different, like, kind of layered customizations, where this one was for these things and this one was for these things, and if you see what I mean.
Yeah, because the situation that Stefan kind of described, with that you are not the owner of the source manifest, is kind of a situation that I'm in constantly, it feels like, where we have some sort of base or whatever, another team who develops this, and we just pull it in, but we want to continuously update the images, but we can't do it on their source. So the current way it works and Flux is kind of perfect then, where it's like, yeah, you're updating the repository that Flux is looking at, and not whatever customization is then pointing towards.
I just realized you said patch file, so you're using the .flux.yaml.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So the customized variation for this thing would be directly using customize, and not making you kind of shell out to customize, which is what the Flux YAML thing does.
Yeah.
So it's sort of that going in that direction is a combination of being less flexible, because you can't just shell out to anything, but the trade-off for that is being about 1,000,000 times more convenient and reliable.
Yeah, because in theory we could add like an image parameter to both the Helm release resource and the customization resource, right? And just have it override whatever is pulled in the end.
Sorry, can you go through that again, Philip?
Well, if we add a like an image field to the Helm release resource and the customization resource, and then any update would basically be done to that field in
like one or other of those, or
yeah, exactly. Because now as Flux is moving away from just having, or I guess in theory you could also have just plain manifests, which would be the difficult part. Because if everything was more of the Argo way of doing it, of having an application, it would be a lot easier to just override the images for each application if you want to see it as that way. Because if everything was either a customization or either a Helm chart, it would be a lot easier then to target them and say, okay, I only want to update the images for the customization resources with this label selector, for example. And then it would just basically write the image tag or the image name there instead.
Yeah, so one second, we will make the image update component being able to target Helm releases. So if in your Helm release, if you will expose there the image name and tag, the image update component will patch the Helm release. So you will not change the Helm chart or anything like that. For the customization custom resource and the customized controller, we are thinking about exposing inside the API, taking the image field object from customize itself and allowing you to specify it inside the customization custom resource. And then the image update component, instead of going back and writing to the deployment YAMLs, it will write to the customization custom resource.
Yeah, exactly. That
makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds kind of reasonable to do it that way, even if you're not using the automatic update. Seems like a nice feature to have.
Yeah, one problem we faced with Flux YAML was the fact that Flux is only able to create a single patch file. So if you have like thousands of deployments, all these patches will go into that file. And another big problem we face with Flux.yaml is the fact that if you delete the original deployment, Flux will stop functioning. You have to go and delete that patch that Flux previously generated. So we don't want to go that path anymore. We are not going to create this huge patch file. We'll if we are doing things with Customize, we'll do it through the custom resource and not have this monolithic patch that we applied in the future, in the past with Flux v1.
Yeah, I guess the biggest challenge is going to be dealing with just like plain deployments that are pulled in, and how that is dealt with in the patching or the overrides or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Okay, let's make sure we have time for the other things on the agenda. So please do visit the discussion that I've linked in the agenda if you want to talk more about the image update stuff. Okay, so Hida or Stefan, if you want to do it, Stefan, there is a upcoming change notice, I think is how I describe it.
Well, I'm open to discuss it, but I don't see any alternatives.
Sure, and then, yeah.
I think first needs a bit of a background story. The current Flux has no custom resources, which makes it not a real problem. But the Helm operator currently does have custom resources. One of the things people may want to do is run the Helm operator and the Helm controller in parallel while they are migrating from V1 Helm releases to the proposed V2 Helm release. The problem with this is that the way Kubernetes works is the fact that a new version of a custom resource is seen as a replacement. So what you define in a custom resource definition is the stored version, which would be v2 for the new Helm release. And the way that works is that it's automatically assumed that only a single controller is handling this custom resource. And the fact that the v1 resources that are in the cluster at that moment will be converted into a v2 resources by the controller. This means that you can't run the Helm operator and the Helm controller in parallel. There are two ways of resolving this. The first one would be to create a new kind, but that would remove that. It would pose two problems. The first one would be that we have Helm repositories, Helm charts, and a Helm release. Well, Helm release is then no longer an option, so you would name it release, but that's not aligned with the other names. And the second option is to create a new domain, which makes it a new custom resource, basically. And our proposal would be to suffix everything with toolkit.fluxcd.io instead of fluxcd.io, which is the current. This would make it possible to run the Helm operator and Helm controller in parallel because they're both observing another custom resource definition. Stefan, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, so this will be a major breaking change in the toolkit. The toolkit is 0.0 something, 14, I think, right now. So I think it's acceptable for us to do this kind of breaking change at this point in time. I don't see it as a viable option to force everyone to upgrade on the moment you install the toolkit on your cluster. You also need to upgrade all your Helm releases to be able to use the same name. And the problem here is the fact that Helm release version 2, which is part of the toolkit, is not backwards compatible with Helm release version 1 that comes with Helm operator. So you cannot just apply the new custom resource definition and everything will work. You have to adapt the things inside the custom resource, how you define, let's say, secrets or config maps or rollback. All these things have been changed in version 2. So either we change the domain name and break everyone's installation of the toolkit. That means you have to do tk uninstall, tk install to get the new thing after we change the group domain, or we rename the Helm release into, I don't know, something that no matter what I'm thinking of doesn't make sense, because a Helm release is a Helm release. If we call it differently, then it's no longer a Helm release. So
it's a shame we did such a good job of choosing the name the first time around.
Yeah, the Helm operator early adopters have been through this in the past. When we donated Flux to CNCF, we changed the group name from helm.weave.works to helm.fluxcd.io. And we documented how that can be done. I haven't seen like crazy bad feedback on that. No one got stuck. So I would just change the domain group and do an announcement for the early adopters of the toolkit that we are doing this. From a migration point of view, I think it adds a lot of value in a way that you can test the two controllers. You can run the two controllers in parallel. You can migrate on your own pace. Maybe, I don't know, you migrate a single namespace or a couple of Helm releases and see how the toolkit works, if it works better, if it uses less resources. We are saying that, yes, it works better, uses way less resources. but maybe people don't want to be forced into migrating all at once. That's
is there a way to do it, changing the group so that all the other things don't have to be changed? Like, this occurred to me as an option. So if the problem is that you can't have the combination of Helm release and helm.fluxcd.io, right, as a kind in group, is there, and you don't want to lose Helm release because it's a good name. So is there something that's not helm.fluxcd.io?
You could, I discussed this with Stefan actually before we brought it to you. We were thinking of helm3.fluxcd.io, but not so sure if that's a better option.
It's pretty close, isn't it, for one thing? Right, so then you end up, the group and the kind are like one character away.
2 characters. Is V3, right? So, yeah.
V3, okay, right. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Just thinking like helm dash.
I don't like a version subdomain because there already is a version at the end of the domain, and
Sure.
I don't know what the future of the Helm controller will look like. If we basically say, okay, this domain is now also versioned to the Helm version, then we may get into other problems at a later moment because the domain no longer matches the Helm version we are running. I don't know. Because that would mean that, say, Helm 4 is released or something, you automatically have to move to another domain. Otherwise, your domain wouldn't make sense anymore.
There's ways to do it that don't involve putting a version in there, right?
Yeah, but do you have a better naming than Helm for something that's completely Helm's domain?
No. But, you know, you can put, what I'm getting at is so I think your suggestion is to change it to helm.toolkit.fluxcd.io.
Yes.
And that compels you to change all of the other ones as well. So
yeah, but no one is using those yet.
Change all of the other ones as well, which is quite a big pain.
Almost everything is automatically generated, or documentation is automatically generated. So I'm not so sure it will take a lot of time. I mean, I think Stefan and I can pull it off in maybe 2 hours.
Yeah.
So like the changes aren't a problem. It's basically a multitude of PRs that need to be created and making the same change over and over again, but for another controller.
Yeah, changing the group name is way easier than changing the kind, because the group name is stored in the KubeBuilder profile file. So you change it there, then you run a make CRD, and KubeBuilder changes it everywhere. Yeah, it's debatable if I mean, we can only add toolkit to the Helm controller, but then it will look very strange to people, because why this one has toolkit and all the others don't have that subdomain?
Sure. I was wondering if you could do it in a way that doesn't seem strange, but you know, up to you. Either way, there will be some breaking change of some scope, whether it's the smaller one of just the Helm thing or the larger one of all the toolkit stuff.
One, let's say, nice thing about adding toolkit to the domains is the fact that we can link to the help documentation using that domain. So for example, we could go into the fluxcd DNS server and say helm.toolkit.fluxcd.io redirect to the toolkit.flux.cd.io/helm, and you get the whole documentation there. The domain will match our website and everything. So that's something that could help people get to the docs easier.
Okay, I'm conscious that we need to give some room for the next agenda item. Is it okay if we just flag that as there may be a breaking change upcoming, more information will come soon?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you. Bianca, you want to talk about the logo / icon?
This is true. Hello. So I guess the context for this is we're going to announce the release of this toolkit eventually, and people need a way to refer to this. So I had some ideas. Can I share my screen?
Yep.
Let me just do that. A little bit disorganized. Here we go. Or actually, let me share a tab. Sorry. Chrome tab. This one. Yeah. Okay, cool. Can you see all of these logos? Yes? No?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So here's kind of a thought process that I went through about a GitOps logo. And it got too complicated here, and I kind of landed on this, which is a combo of the Git connector, some of the Git commits, Git merge sort of idea with the DevOps flow. I actually changed it a little bit to become overlapped because I thought that was a little bit more fun. Just want to know what people think. This blue is Kubernetes blue. Or I mean, if people have ideas that I should go in a different direction, they want me to participate, just wanted to offer my services to the cause. Yeah, so what do you think?
I like it. Do you think that it should have a different identity to, there's kind of a sort of Flux, there's a Flux logo which gets used for the whole org. So would we replace that, or would we have a sort of commercial use logo? Well, it's not a commercial use logo, but
right. The idea is that, go on.
This would be a replacement for that one, or
no, because the Flux. Oh, okay. So, but do you think they don't need separate logos, or they should have logos to relate to each other? I don't know. It's one of these. It's not this, but it's kind of like this. You get the idea.
I'm more thinking. My line of thought is the Flux logo is identified. It's like with Flux CD, the Git repo.
Mm-hmm.
Toolkit is also in that org. Sorry, not the repo, the Flux CD org. So I think we have to. All I'm really saying is we should be deliberate about saying this covers these things. This covers these things. If we keep both of them, because otherwise there's quite a significant overlap. They're both representing stuff that's in Flux CD org on GitHub.
Yeah.
So we need to know when do we use this one?
Yeah, I just don't think that the Flux logo represents GitOps. It represents Flux. It has really nothing to do with Git at all. But yeah, I know I didn't see that coming. Yeah, that's a fair question. Maybe we should just put that in the docs and people can weigh in. Like, should we have two logos? Should everything be GitOps for like the GitOps Toolkit and Flux v2 moving forward? Also, I feel like the definition between GitOps Toolkit and Flux v2 is a little bit, there's a lot of gray zone, or at least I don't understand it well.
Depends who you ask. Present.
exactly. So if you ask me, I don't know. Okay, so yeah, that's a fair question. I'll also bring it up with Daniel, because Daniel asked me to come in here and present this. So
Cool.
yeah.
Is this particular one for GitOps Toolkit?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool actually. I can see the G and the O.
Oh, I didn't think of that.
You didn't plan that?
No. Wait, okay, don't tell anyone that I didn't plan that.
It was subliminal. It works. It's great.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, we could have different logos, different identities if the toolkit will expand beyond what Flux v2 will be doing. And there are hints that could be possible. There are other contributors to the toolkit. They are building their own CI platform on top of the toolkit components, like source controller. They are not using it for continuous deployment. They are using it for continuous integration. They are pulling the source code from Git through the source controller, and then they build container images or running unit tests and stuff like that. So in the future, if we'll have components in the toolkit contributed by others or by us or whatever, that doesn't make sense to make it part of Flux because it targets a different area than what Flux does. Then maybe it makes sense to have an identity, a visual identity for the toolkit itself. Right now, the toolkit is just Flux decomposed and Helm operator decomposed into specialized controllers. But if we move beyond that, then conflating the two could be confusing for people.
Yeah, I just want just to clarify what I was saying. I wasn't coming at it from a point of view of we already have one. Take your stuff elsewhere. I don't want a challenger. I would just saying this brings up the issue of if we think of GitOps Toolkit as being a successor to Flux, stuff that's in Flux CD, then should we migrate to this and just use this one thing? I'm not so attached to what we have now that I don't mind replacing it if that seems, if that is what we want to do. But it might be worthwhile maintaining two separate identities. Personally, I think they're close enough. They're both very strongly identified with Flux CD org. There's a direct line between Flux v1 and GitOps Toolkit.
Yeah.
So, I would be completely happy with the idea of, here is a new thing which is better represents sort of the diversity of or plurality of GitOps Toolkit. So let's use this one instead of the previous one. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
That'd be one completely reasonable thing to go for.
I want to say that I like this logo way more than the current Flux CD logo. Good job, Bianca.
Thank you.
The prior ones.
Also, I mean, did you notice the G and the O?
I mean, I think the accidental G and the O is brilliant. So way to go.
Yeah. Can you create a discussion, Bianca, and post the logo in there?
In
GitHub.
community Slack or on GitHub?
Yeah.
Sure.
I will give you the link.
In the toolkit. Oh, please send me the link. Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, it's 1 minute too, so let's wrap up. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I think we are going to end up organizing a parallel set of meetings which are at a more US-friendly time. I'm not sure, but I think Daniel's going to do that, so watch out for those. Otherwise, we're going to stick to the time and day that we've got currently. So hopefully I'll see all of you, or as many as possible next time. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.